Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Hey Newberry Fishing. I'm out here messing around with the boat today. I'm actually here soon, probably the next video on the water that I make, I will be in a different boat. Just recently, I bought a different boat. I'm working on switching a bunch of electronics over. I'm gonna have actually a new motor put on the other boat that I bought, and just doing a whole bunch of that stuff, doing a bunch of house stuff. My baby's due in a week, so I've got that coming up. So everything is going on, everything's changing around the house currently, but I couldn't help myself. I had to come out here and make a video about Livescope. There's like 9 million different angles to talk about stuff with this. Everybody keeps having their own opinions and everything on it. Truthfully, does the internet need another Livescope opinion video? Absolutely not. I just have to do it because I want to speak my piece on the subject, because there's so many misconceptions about it, and there's a lot of I guess to say from the start, if you are new to my channel at all, which a lot of you that watch my videos know, that I don't use Livescope that much. In tournaments like last year, I used it very, very, very little. I would say maybe just a few of the fish my entire year were weighed in with Livescope. The rest of them were shallow fishing. I like to fish shallow around grass, stumps, everything like that, and I don't use it. I truthfully don't think you absolutely need it necessarily to do well in a lot of tournaments, but there are some that you absolutely do need it in, and we're going to talk about those some too. But first off, the kind of what I just said, do you necessarily absolutely 100% need Livescope to do well throughout the season? There are individual tournaments, absolutely, and most of those are actually smallmouth tournaments. Some largemouth tournaments, yes, but to do well in a tournament, you do not need Livescope. Example number one, John Cox. Still hasn't put Livescope on his boat, finished 12th in AOY this year, and as I mentioned earlier in one of my other videos, if you look at, or if you had looked at the top 5 in the AOY standings in the Bassmasters, as of before they went up north, they were all shallow fishermen. I think, which Tyler Rivette was in there, but big thing to put next to it is that he won one with Livescope, but he also was catching them shallow during that tournament, and in other tournaments, not just that one, he was catching them shallow also, but that's just one of the top 5. So 4 of the top 5, and this is overall, were not Livescopers. The AOY this year, Kyle Welcher, until he went up north to smallmouth fish, if you watched him on live, he wasn't scoping them. He was up throwing swim jigs and stuff up shallow. So there's not necessarily, for an entire season, if you're fishing largemouth areas and stuff like that, springtime throwing spinnerbait, stuff like that around, no, you don't need Livescope. You can do well in tournaments without it. I've done well in plenty of tournaments without it. Let this loud tractor go by. But you don't necessarily need that sort of thing to do well in a tournament. But another point to be made is when you do go up north, if you've watched live, you see people using Livescope. But kind of the part of that I wanted to hit on was that people are acting like if we outlaw Livescope that we're no longer going to see people staring at their graphs up north, which is absolutely not true. I'm not sure if you guys just started watching bass fishing yesterday, but every single time we've went up north for the past 15 years since we had good electronics period, side scan and down scan and everything, it was guys staring at their graphs. You look at Lake Cherokee when Wheeler was catching them, and this is Cherokee. This isn't even going up. This is just a southern smallmouth lake. Wheeler won it, and it was a bunch of guys staring at their graphs with down imaging. So I'm not sure that that's going to change a lot. The big question I have that a lot of people have also had a question about is, can you put the genie back in the bottle once everybody knows what's out there? And an angle of that I think it would be interesting to see, I would hate to be the guys that have to trial this out, are what happens when you go to these smallmouth fisheries and don't have Livescope, I think you'd see the weights be horrible. I think the weights would come down and be terrible, because back when guys were using down imaging and stuff on them, those fish weren't as pressured out there. A lot of times they'd pass under the bottom of the boat and hang there. And since Livescope has emerged, you don't see that a lot anymore. Like, if you're looking around a lake on a smallmouth fishery with Livescope, they don't stay long. It's not like you can go out there and just jig below the trolling motor and wait on one to get curious. They've gotten so smart now that if you outlaw Livescope in tournaments, those fish are still going to be caught with Livescope on days when a tournament's not running, and then you're going to have to go out there on the weekend with a bunch of other locals Livescoping them and then somehow catch them. It'll be tough. Absolutely. It'd be super tough. But I guess aside from all these points, I saw another thing that I wanted to talk about. We're just kind of going to jump around to all the different Livescope myths and maybe not so much myths, but one is there's a lot of people making assumptions, I guess. I guess all they could be is really assumptions, because some of them are people that, and probably everybody on here knows what I'm talking about, people that don't have Livescope and then are saying things that people with Livescope that we've experienced from just, it's a great tool to study fish and fish behavior. This thing that pulling a fish up from deep down and then releasing it, that fish can't do that. That fish don't change depths, and that all these guys that are out in the center of the lake are catching them deep. Not true. I'm not sure. I would love to see people that say stuff like that. Still not gonna name names, but everybody knows who I'm talking about. People that say stuff like that, I wish they could see, and because it's intriguing. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a big Livescope guy, but seeing real fish behavior and not assumptions on what you see when you watch somebody with Livescope, that every one of these fish that they're chasing out in the middle of the lake are super deep. A lot of them are like 2 or 3 feet deep. That's where they hunt around out there. And then also the fish, if you pull one up from 30 feet and release it, it's doomed. It's got barrow trauma, and those fish are gonna die. Those fish do that all the time. When you're chasing them out there in the middle of the lake, I've watched it. They will come up from like 40 plus feet deep right up to the surface, and they'll be feeding up there, and then they will go right back down so fast. So I'm not quite sure that just having a hook in their mouth all of a sudden is going to give them barrow trauma. I'm pretty sure that those fish are probably just fine, and if people that are making these assumptions had Livescope, and that's why I feel like there's such a big disconnect from people that are hardcore no Livescope guys, or that they're arguing with people that have seen fish behavior with Livescope, so they know, I mean, outright know a lot more about fish behavior. And I don't know why even a guy, because they're so interested, I'm just interested in watching what fish are able to do and the myths and everything behind it to see fish behavior. I'm surprised that a lot of these guys haven't just been curious enough to get a unit just to like go out there and look at what's happening, not even necessarily go out there and try to catch them that way. But the next point I was going to get to is the bizarre thing of it being outlawed in tournaments, and then guys using the argument that it's better for the fish, so we should outlaw them in tournaments. I think we're kind of barking up the wrong tree there. If we're looking at it being better for the fish, they need to be looking at actually trying to get it outlawed, period. And that's not really far-fetched. The A-rig, they jumped on that so fast. I mean, there's a lot of states that you can't throw one, you can't have one in your boat. 90% of the time there's some type of limit on the amount of hooks you can have. The state I'm in has a limit on the amount of hooks. And the Livescope thing for some reason hasn't been hit on by that whole scenario. I don't know why states haven't made any kind of restrictions on them yet. It's kind of surprising, truthfully. But if people are worried about the fish and the fish populations, working on getting them outlawed in tournaments isn't helping anybody. I mean, I guess maybe that's a step in the right direction, but till you get the guys that are picking them off crappie trees and out there throwing them in the live well when they're in the middle of the lake, you're not helping the fish populations by outlawing them in tournaments. You're just making tournaments really hard. So truthfully, I think a lot of the guys that are saying that are just upset because they think that magically, if Livescope's banned, that they're gonna start winning every tournament. It's not true. If you were really, really that good, you'd be in that top 5 in the AOY halfway through this Bassmaster season, because those guys weren't out there Livescoping them. John Cox, Drew Benton, he was sight fishing. And Brandon Cobb, Kyle Welcher, those guys weren't scoping them the vast majority of the season. And people are arguing that somehow Livescope's going to make you better in tournaments, or make you better by other people not using it. If anything, you don't want those guys to, all the really, really good guys, to now fixate back on it. It's like the whole MLF thing that I feel like a lot of people thought if they changed the format of MLF that all of a sudden some different guys were going to be on top. Didn't work out. Same guys killed everybody this season. Almost the exact same group of them were in the top 10 almost every time, and you still had guys out there cheating, trying to get ahead. So I don't know. Got a lot of opinions on it. I'm going to have some more. Next video, I think I'm going to do a little bit of what I talked about doing earlier in the season, because of this whole sight fishing dead type of thing. Shallow water fishermen don't have a chance. We're going to go through and see what patterns made top 10s this season. See if the majority of them were live scopers or not. And we'll see where we go from there. Thanks for watching the video, guys. See you on the next one.